In previous years I was invited by the Panzermuseum Munster and the Tank Museum at Boving. About 100 Leopard 1s are being sent to Ukraine soon. Yet the German combat engineer serving in Ukraine points out that in many cases he thinks that the Leopard 1 is preferable over the next generation of main battle tanks sent to Ukraine, namely the Challenger 2 and Leopard 2. First the news: according to several sources, Ukraine should soon receive 110 Leopard 1 tanks. These are refurbished tanks from Germany, Netherlands and Denmark. In February 2023, the German government agreed to allow an export of Leopard 1 tanks. Note that this came after Leopard 2s from various other countries were confirmed to be sent to Ukraine. Some of you might be aware that already in April 2022, so more than 1 year ago, Rheinmetall noted that they could send 50 Leopard 1 tanks to Ukraine. But back then, Western main battle tanks were still a no-no. From the information available, these Leopard 1 tanks will be Leopard 1A5s. So the latest base variant available in large numbers. Keep in mind that various countries like Denmark or Canada created sub-variants. We don't cover them here. The Leopard 1A5 has a thermal imaging system and the fire control system EMS 18, which is similar but not identical to that in the Leopard 2 tank. Now let us look at the points the German combat engineer made about why he thinks Leopard 1s are more important than Leopards 2 in Ukraine. We are aware that this is based on his tweets from January 2023. He starts off by noting that the focus on main battle tanks when it comes to effective support for Ukraine is misleading. He states that main battle tanks are very good at what they are built for, fighting other tanks, mobile protected fire support, but very bad at everything else. He then adds that tanks need support from other weapon systems and arms. Unsurprisingly, combined arms warfare is very important. And the tanks without such a support can't really provide much value. And if one looks at a German Panzer division from World War II, this is also rather apparent. Here you can see the setup of a Panzer division from 1939. If you can't read NATO symbology, well, this is the part with tanks. Everything else is infantry, recon, artillery, signal troops, etc. And by 1944, it did not look that much different in terms of different arms, although the composition changed quite a bit. For instance, the number of infantry increased quite substantially, but more on this on my article and/or presentation from the Panzerkonferenz 2022, sadly only available in German. Yet back to Ukraine, the combat engineer then notes which are the most important weapon systems and areas where Ukraine should receive support in his opinion. The ranked list is as follows. First, artillery and ammunition. Second, air defense and air surveillance. Third, reconnaissance systems and drones. Fourth, mechanized combat vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, main battle tank, armored personnel carriers. Fifth, electronic warfare equipment. Then the rest. Now, I wasn't sure if this ranking was based on actual shortages or in general. As such I asked him, he clarified that this is a general ranking. He then explained why he considers the delivery of the Leopard 1 as important. Although Leopard 2 and Challenger tanks are clearly superior to the Leopard 1, this is mostly relevant in one situation: tank versus tank combat. He continues to add, such situations are rarest on the battlefield of Ukraine. Tanks are usually destroyed by artillery, mines or infantry weapons. The latter is of course also due to the lack of proper combined arms warfare. Now, combined arms warfare is not just the use of different arms like tanks, infantry and artillery, but to use them in a synchronized way. For full explanation, check out this video where I talk with an officer from the Belgian Armed Forces. Now, the combat engineer notes that the main duties of main battle tanks in Ukraine are fire support with direct and indirect fire, and for that older tanks are suited as well as the newer ones. Newer tanks generally are better in terms of firepower, armor protection, mobility, optics and command and control equipment, yet those benefits come with a price. And we are not talking just about one-time cost for buying, but about the ongoing cost in terms of logistics. So something you have to basically pay every day and puts a constant drain on the system. There are various reasons for this. One is just the weigh considerable more. The newer tanks need generally more fuel, repair gear, repair crews. Bigger guns also means larger shells, etc. This in terms also means more trucks in logistical trains and thus also more wear and tear. Also, since Ukraine also has vehicles based on the Leopard 1 chassis like the self-propelled anti-aircraft tank like the Leopard and the Panzer II in service, there is a bit of an overlap. In terms of logistics, the Leopard 1 is clearly preferable in many ways. First, historically the Leopard 1 was used by a lot of NATO countries. Nowadays only Greece and Turkey operate them. Greece has about 500 and Turkey around 400. Although there are various countries that still use vehicles on the Leopard 1 chassis as well, like recovery vehicles. This means that plenty of spare parts are in stock or can be salvaged. Meanwhile, for the Leopard 2 and Challenger 2, those parts might not be allocated too easily since they are still used extensively as well. Of course, in this case the production of spare parts likely is more active. Then there's of course the weight in the tactical sense, and I must add here I pointed this out already last year, whereas many people complained in the combat section that I was wrong. But the combat engineer brings up this point as well, and it is in line with what I stated last year, although he adds more detail. I am primarily concerned with the problems with the MLC, the military load class. Vehicle weight has enormous potential for problems. Leopard 2 weighs 60 to 62 tons, Challenger even 64 tons. Soviet models T-64, 72, 80, 90 only between 38 and 47 tons. He then further elaborates. This means that existing infrastructure such as bridges as well as logistics such as flatbed trucks, flatbed wagons and pioneer assets such as pontoon bridges are not designed to handle such high loads. This limits the operational capabilities of these weapon systems. Leopard 1 with 43 tons or MX-30 with 36 tons would not encounter any problems here. I wouldn't turn down the heavy main battle tanks, please send whatever works, but there's also potential with older systems. So yeah, as so often, the devil is in the detail. Now some general information about the Leopard 1 tank. For simplicity's sake, we'll look at the Leopard 1A5 variant. Let us look at firepower first. The Leopard 1 is equipped with the British 105mm L7 gun that a lot of NATO tanks used. It was a great gun for its time, now it is a bit outdated. In short, 105mm, not great, not terrible. As mentioned, tank duels are very rare. Nevertheless, some words about it. The Leopard 1 would have a hard time to penetrate the Russian T-64, T-72, T-80 and T-90s from the front, unless some well-improved ammo is used. The older T-62 or T-55 should not be an issue. Although flanking shots should have no problem in penetrating any of those tanks and lucky hits can always happen. As mentioned, the fire control system of the Leopard 1A5 was upgraded. The laser rangefinder gave a fast and more precise acquisition capability, thus reducing the time lapse to open fire considerably with the corresponding far higher first round hit capability. The new fire control system, aside from the laser distance, also incorporated factors such as temperature of the propellant, air temperature, air pressure, side wind, system malfunction and position of the vehicle. The fire control enabled the gunner to keep his reticle on the center of the target independently from type of ammunition, ballistic factors or speed of the moving target. Lead angle and elevation were given by the computer automatically, thus aligning the gun autonomously. Particularly interesting here are statements from the military historian and former 1 Leopard driver Jens Wehner. You might know him from my videos. On his private Twitter account he noted that he learned to fire and drive in about 6 weeks. Let us look at armor protection next. This is the weakest part of the Leopard 1. Rolf Hilmes notes, in the design philosophy for the Leopard 1 Kampfpanzer, a conscious decision had been made in 1956 to abandon the race between protection and ammunition effectiveness, giving the Leopard 1 relatively modest armor protection initially. The hull is regular steel, not composite armor. Later there were some armor upgrades, but generally those won't make much of a difference against tank guns from the Russian tanks. They had on armor, although included special shock mounts that should reduce damage from autocannon fire that might damage sensors, vision devices and other important equipment. Of course, we can assume that Ukrainians will put explosive reactive armor on the Leopard to protect it from RPGs, conquerors and other high explosive anti-tank warheads. Next is mobility. This was one of the strengths of the Leopard 1, but it is quite old. The 1A5 has a horsepower to metric ton ratio of 19.5. In comparison, the T80BV has 25.15 horsepower per metric ton. When it comes to the T-72s, which is the most numerous tank in the Russian Federation, it depends on the variant, but generally the Leopard is on the lower end here. Of course, the ratio is not everything. There is a video of a T-72 racing against the Leopard 1. where the Leopard 1 wins. But then again, I don't know which exact variant of the T-72 this is, nor how well maintained, driven, etc. these tanks were in the video. As such, we can assume that the Leopard 1 is likely only comparable to the weaker T-72s in the Russian army in terms of mobility. Yet the Leopard 1 should not be a match for the T-72s upgraded with the stronger engines, nor the T-80s and T-90s. Yet the Leopard 1 has one major strength in terms of mobility compared to Russian tanks, namely it has a high reverse speed. You might have seen footage from the war where Russian or Ukrainian tanks turn when they try to disengage from the enemy, but by doing so exposing their weak side and rear armor to the enemy. This is due to the fact that they have a very low reverse speed of around 5 km per hour. Finally, let us touch briefly on what I would call a soft feature. If we look at the height differences between the Leopard 1 and the T-72, there's a major difference. The height to roof is 2.39 meters for the Leopard 1 and 2.90 meters for the T-72. The Soviet design philosophy was generally to keep tanks as small as possible to provide a small target. This was in parts achieved by rather small areas for the crew, but also by the use of autoloaders. For instance, the T-72 has only a 3-man crew since there is no loader, whereas US and German tanks generally have a 4-man crew. The oddities of Soviet tank design in the 1960s led to a host of standard tanks that were substantially smaller and lighter than their NATO counterparts. The combat-laden T-72 M1 weighed 41.5 tons compared to 56.8 tons for the M1A1, thus being 1/3 lighter. One of the most immediate results of this was the amount of internal space for the crew. One could argue that the additional space in the Leopard 1 just makes it a bigger target, and considering that it is rather weakly armored in general, that it makes the Leopard 1 even weaker. Meanwhile, others might argue that due to the more space for the crew, the Leopard 1 is better suited for prolonged combat operations than the T-72s, since it is less cramped. To summarize, Ukraine soon will receive 110 Leopard 1 tanks. Despite these tanks being rather old, this should not be underestimated. First, because tank versus tank combat is rather rare. Second, because the Leopard 1 is still equipped with some updated systems like the fire control and thermal imaging system. Third, soft features like ergonomics might prove important in certain missions. Fourth, the high reverse speed allows the Leopard to disengage safely, which is particularly important in delaying actions and shoot and scoot tactics. Fifth, in terms of logistics and weight, the Leopard 1 is clearly a better option than newer main battle tanks like the Leopard 2 or Challenger 2. Thank you to Andrew for reviewing the script. Thank you to Panzermuseum Munster and the Tank Museum at Bovington for inviting me in the past years.